Welcome to the MBA and Executive Education Masterclass series, where we talk to thought leaders from both industry and academia. And today, very, very excited to have Chelsea Rapp with us. So Chelsea is the Games Ambassador at the University of Canterbury. I said that first, there's 3 titles coming. She's also the Head of Strategy at Cerebral Fix, and she is the Chair of the New Zealand Game Developers Association, who's recently had a massive win. Tell us about that, Chelsea.
Yes, so last month the government announced a new game sector rebate, which is called the GDSR. And essentially the way that it works is game studios will be able to get 20% of their eligible expenditure back as a part of a rebate at the end of every year. And this is exciting because it finally brings us in line with what is essentially a global standard in supporting the game development sector. And so many countries have invested in these rebate programs because they acknowledge the incredible opportunity that the game sector brings.
So what are those opportunities? Why is it important for New Zealand to do that?
Well, I mean, it's more than just, when people think about video games, I think they often think about, the guy who's sitting in his mom's basement playing Call of Duty in the dark. But the reality is that games are much more ubiquitous than that, and they're much more diverse than that. I mean, obviously, the entertainment video game is the most profitable in the game sector, but there are lots of games for education, there are job training simulations, there are medical rehab games, actually the non-game applications of game technology have overtaken the game applications. So there are more people using game engines and game tech to build tools for businesses than there are people using them to make games. So it's important for New Zealand because this is, getting access to these tools and these skills is how we modernize our economy, and it's how tech really allows us to take ourselves into the future. And so without this investment, because New Zealand was really the only country that didn't have a rebate program, we saw all of our game developers being essentially lured overseas, either physically relocating to countries like Australia or working remotely for game studios in the US. And that's because globally this is a very in-demand skill set.
Yeah, and this is something that I realized talking to you, is that if you want to lead the future of business, you need to invest in the gaming industry, because that's where the future is happening real time, because the gaming industry just works at a completely different pace.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to tell people that you're going to be at our party, you just don't know it yet. And that's simply because game tech is going to become completely ubiquitous, not just in the lives of business, but also in the way that the individual consumes media. I mean, the mobile phone was revolutionary when it became a complete touch screen, and people said, this is where this is going to end. But when people think about things like the metaverse and what that could mean for individuals and Apple's new headset, the way that we engage with all kinds of content media is going to be through game technology.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to get into the field because, there's so much investment being made in this space. Yeah. And again, across all sectors. I mean, I work in our work at Cerebral Fix, we've worked with geotech companies, and we've worked with doctors and finance companies, and just lots of people who are looking at this and saying, how can I get involved?
And we would be amiss to not talk about the Digital Screen Campus very, very quickly. Tell us about your work and your involvement with that campus.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Digital Screen Campus is a really exciting innovation for Christchurch specifically, an incredible opportunity for the University of Canterbury, but also for New Zealand as a whole. And it's because, the university is investing about $130 million into the redevelopment of that campus, the Dovedale campus, which sits about a kilometer west of its main Island campus. And it's really going to become this space, sort of like a media park that's dedicated to film, television, and video games. And the goal is for it to be a place where industry, education, businesses, all of them sort of collide in this creative space where we're hoping it'll be a place of, innovation, not just for entertainment games, but really media content in general. And all of it really centers around the new Bachelor of Digital Screen, which has 6 majors across those industries, everything from cinematic arts to game development, game arts, screenwriting, you name it. It's also home to New Zealand's only minor and Indigenous narrative, which is all about using Māori and Pacifica storytelling techniques and learning about those techniques to tell modern stories, whether they're about culture or not, which I think is really an incredible opportunity for New Zealanders, but really for anybody who's interested in learning about techniques that have been used for thousands of years.
And what I really love about you, Chelsea, is that you bring this international network to Christchurch. Tell us a little bit more about your background and just how that kind of eclectic background of yours came to being, and just how you leverage yourself in this space, and by default, the university and all the companies associated with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I would love to say that I have a very sort of indirect route into game development, but the funny thing is that it's not actually that unusual. So I used to be a molecular geneticist. I actually have 3 degrees in the biomedical sciences that I don't use, but I got into video games when I moved to New Zealand about 5 years ago. And I used to work in software development for medical devices, specifically sort of massively parallel DNA sequencing. And in that role, I did a lot of sort of regulatory policy and strategy and developing strategy for clinical trials, which led me to work with the Food and Drug Administration. And it was sort of in that role that I honed this ability to tell stories about really technical information to people who are not technical, which is an incredible skill for anybody in a technical field to develop. And so when I moved to New Zealand and I wanted to, get out of medical sciences and into something more creative, I'm a lifelong gamer, so video games made sense. And I came at a time, where the NZGDA was really starting to pick up its lobbying for the rebate, but also for, industry development grant and lots of other things like improving diversity in the game and the tech sectors. And it was really those skills in being able to talk about technical content to people who are not in the industry that really made the NZGDA successful over the last 3 years. And I was able to build on the incredible work that's been done over the last decade, ultimately, obviously, culminating in this rebate. And that has, a lot of those skills have also helped me at the game studio and as head of strategy.
How did all of that then lead to a role in strategy, essentially?
Yeah, so I mean, getting to liaise with a lot of game studios here in New Zealand, but also being able to go to a lot of global conferences. The great thing about video games is that we always say that they're global from day one. So every video game that's ever made is always made for a global audience. And because of that, all of the game developers across the world sort of converge at these really specific times. And that allows all of us here in New Zealand, especially those of us who go to these conferences, to essentially be ambassadors, not just for our own businesses, but for our universities, for our industries, for investors. And that's really allowed me to bring a lot of those connections back to New Zealand, a lot of that expertise, skill sets, talent, which has come to benefit, the industry as a whole.
And we are punching above our weight, aren't we, as New Zealanders and as Cantabrians? Tell us a little bit more about some of the wins in this space.
Definitely. I think when a lot of New Zealanders think about video games, they think about it as being something that's made in America or made in Europe. It's not something that we do here, but it's actually much larger than I think people give us credit for. There are about 75 game studios in New Zealand, and last year they generated over $400 million in revenue, which is actually more than New Zealand wool did last year. So, wool being the thing that New Zealand is really known for, it's, completely possible that video games could be the next thing that we're known for, especially because we already have such a reputation in film, right? And film and games, are converging closer and closer every day. So I think it's a real opportunity for, New Zealand to sort of step into the global stage and say, we're here, we have this incredible pool of talent, we have this new rebate, and we're already really well known for a lot of games. I mean, Christchurch in particular, I mean, Digital Confectioners had a breakout hit, one of the largest games in China last year called Dread Hunger. And then also this year, Dredge, which is from a small studio called Black Salt Games, an indie game which has just absolutely swept the circuit and is, you know, up for all kinds of awards, which is really exciting for everyone involved in those, but also for those of us back home who are saying, yes, like, let's take New Zealand to the world stage.
And what is it about the New Zealand gaming industry what do they do differently, and what can business leaders learn from these businesses?
Well, I think one thing that everybody from the outside who comes to the New Zealand sector and looks at it, the one thing they all say is that the New Zealand game sector is unbelievably collaborative. We have online communities like on Slack and Discord where all of the managers can get together and talk about different challenges that they're facing. New businesses can join these groups and solve a lot of critical problems, like everything from NDAs to HR, you know, legal agreements, how to transfer money between countries. It becomes essentially like a support network for, you know, new and emerging businesses, which if you're a startup and you've never done this before, especially in this industry, that's an incredible asset to have access to that doesn't cost you anything.
Wow.
And because of that, you know, a lot of studios are always willing to offer up connections and contacts and recommendations. And I think that just lowers the barrier for a lot of businesses. So they can focus on the things that really matter, like their products and funding and, you know, scaling up, you know, the types of challenges that every business faces. And I also think that New Zealand does a really good job at selling the New Zealand brand. And I think, you know, between the New Zealand tech story, between our representation at conferences, you know, NZTE, we have a really strong national brand. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for businesses to lean into that and to gather together and say, hey, how can we work together to represent ourselves outside of our smaller community?
Do you know, there's a whole stream of research in co-opetition that just talks to businesses needing to collaborate more. And it's actually such a mind shift within the business community, because it's not about then competing, it's about lowering the barriers. Yet if you think about it, you don't want to lower barriers to potential competitors. So what is that magic juice in the gaming industry? I mean, you're not going to solve world peace here in one thing, but it's so interesting to me that we have such a collaborative environment and that it's bearing the fruit of that collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, we're in a really unique position because we always joke in the game sector that ideas are free.
Yeah.
The thing about video games is that you could take an idea and give it to 10 different studios, the same idea to 10 studios, and each of them will create their own unique product based on their own ideas, their own perceptions, their own realities. So we don't compete in the same way that regular business products do. And the truth about the game user is that people tend to gravitate towards really specific personas or, you know, genres. So for instance, and this is very common, you'll see one studio that will launch a game in a particular genre, like an action RPG, and there might be another studio that's making a very similar game. They'll try to launch not too far from each other because once players finish playing that other game, they love to have one that they can immediately jump into. So people who buy one game in one genre are very much likely going to purchase the game in the other one as well.
Wow.
So that, you know, competition doesn't really happen on the same level.
Yeah.
I think one challenge that we do have that other businesses don't have is digital distribution. You know, our distribution is really limited by the platform holders. You know, the Apple App Store, Steam, you know, the Android App Store, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. I mean, the way that games get distributed is really limited to a handful of platforms.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of sort of regular product and service businesses can find organic and unique ways to reach their customers. So that's one particular challenge that we have that not everyone does.
Yeah, and why is that a challenge? Like, what are the down the line implications of having a small distribution network, I suppose? A small network of platforms? that will distribute, right?
Yes. I mean, one particular challenge is that the entire world is competing for what is essentially the attention of a very limited number of people. And so much success can really hinge on, you know, when people load up their Steam page or they start their PlayStation, does your game appear on that front page? Do you end up in the sales? Do you end up on the deals? All of that, the algorithm that gets you to the front, all of those algorithms sort of sit behind closed doors, and we all kind of speculate, you know, what day is best to release a game, what time is best to release a game. A lot of it can be who you know at PlayStation, at Xbox. There can be a lot of variation in, you know, different account managers at the different platforms. So one account manager might be able to get you into a deal every month. Another one can do it once a year. And that can be really challenging, especially for indie studios that are first getting started out, because they haven't built those relationships and that good rapport with those platforms. So that can be a challenge. But again, I think New Zealand does a really good job at sharing those connections and advocating for each other. For instance, at our conference every year, it's really common for studios to bring in their publishers and their distributors and their networks to the conference and then intentionally introduce them to the indie developers and saying, hey, look, you have a game that I think would be perfect for the Apple Arcade. Here's my friends at Apple Arcade. So I think that New Zealand does better than most in trying to make that barrier as small as possible, especially for new and emerging businesses.
So exciting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that these games are global from day one, but how do we put a New Zealand stamp on it, and how do we differentiate? Do we do that, and how do you manage that tension?
You know, really good stories are universal. And I think there's an incredible opportunity for us to tell uniquely New Zealand stories from a cultural perspective, from a natural perspective, from a geopolitical perspective. And I think ultimately it's about giving people the tools necessary to make those stories engaging. Because everybody has a story to tell, and it's all about, you know, creating that story, translating that story into an interactive video game and allowing that player to put themselves into that experience and make themselves a part of that story, to make them feel like they have an impact on the outcome. And I think that there are lots of ways that we can do that. There are lots of amazing examples of studios that are doing that now. Guardian Maya from Matia Interactive up in Auckland, they're making this incredible Māori storytelling RPG. And the really amazing thing is that the studio director, Maruni Honiho, actually used 3D scanning technology to scan her daughter and make her the main character of the story. And so you get to watch this incredibly powerful young woman go through this incredible story that is relatable not just for people who are, you know, born and raised in New Zealand, but anywhere. And it'll be kind of the first time that, you know, there's a uniquely New Zealand story being made for a global audience.
Wow. What's next for you in terms of kind of what is a goal, a future, I suppose both personally and within the gaming industry that you would work towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think now that we have this rebate, and also there was the expansion of CODE, which is the Center of Digital Excellence down in Dunedin. This is like a startup. It's more than just funding. They fund games, but they also have incredible mentorship networks. So they provide a ton of mentorship and learning opportunities for game studios. They were originally only operating in Dunedin, and last year they've got extra funding and permission from the government to operate nationally. So now we really have end-to-end business support for game studios, from emerging startups all the way through really established businesses. I think for the game industry, this is going to be a really tough year because we were advocating for the rebate for 3 years. And a lot of studios last year and this year, before the rebate was announced, lost really senior experienced talent to Australia and the US. Those businesses are still reeling from that. It's going to take time for them to recover. And so I think for the first time this year, we'll probably see the industry shrink because of the impacts of waiting so long to get that rebate in. But we will bounce back, definitely. Just like, you know, kind of all sectors of the economy, these initiatives are going to go a long way to helping those businesses recover from that shock. And then I think after that, they're only going to grow, especially, you know, as more businesses look at this as an opportunity to diversify their own revenue streams and partner with game studios to create new innovative products, which is incredibly exciting. I think for me personally, you know, my term at the NZGDA ends in November. It's been an incredible pleasure serving as the chair for the last 3 years. I think it's one of those things where it's time for a fresh face. I'm pretty sure people are tired of hearing from me. So I would love to see somebody new in the role who can apply their own dreams and ambitions to it. I think for me personally, I'm definitely looking forward to getting into more of the business startup and investment space. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of sort of traditional tech investors who are very interested in getting into games, and I think on a personal level I'm keen to help more people do that, because I think it will only increase the opportunity for game studios all across New Zealand.
That's right. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you so much for coming
my pleasure.
through, and we are so lucky to have you, Chelsea.
Thank you.